Hello, everyone. Welcome to MisinfoDay. MisinfoDay is hosted by the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public in partnership with the Washington State University Edward R. Murrow College of Communication. I'm Liz Krause, MisinfoDay planner at the Center for an Informed Public. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today as we learn to resist misinformation and be better informed. Before we start, I want to show you where we're all tuning in from today. We are here with students, teachers, and librarians from across Washington State and the US, and we even have some people tuning in internationally. So thank you so much for joining us today. This session is Understanding the Landscape of Information Disorder with Jacqueline Mason. Jacqueline is a senior investigative researcher at First Draft News, who focuses on mis and disinformation in Black and Latinx communities. There will be time at the end of the session to answer your questions. So if you have questions for Jacqueline at any point during the session, you can use the Q&A form linked in the description box below to submit those. That's all from me. I'll pass it off to Jacqueline.
Great, thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about understanding the landscape of information disorder. And you might not have heard the term information disorder before. You might have heard the term disinformation, misinformation, fake news, which we like to avoid, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's get started. My name is Jacqueline Mason. I am Senior Investigative Researcher and Special Projects Manager at First Draft. And at First Draft, we work to empower people with a knowledge and understanding and tools to build resilience against harmful, false, and misleading information. We are based out of 3 locations, so we are in the USA, but if you're watching from abroad, we also have offices in Europe and in the APAC region. So basically what we work on is from misleading narratives to conspiracy theories and all of the complexities and of information pollution, things you may have seen, recently play out on television that, aren't quite right, or you may have heard people talking about different mis or disinformation spreading post-election or about the pandemic. That's really what we work in, and all the challenges that presents. So let's get into the beginning of misinformation. So our relationship to all information is emotional, right? And we talk a little bit at First Draft about emotional skepticism. If something makes you angry, sad, want to buy something, we have an urge to share that information, right? Without actually investigating and looking into the facts. So when we think about mis and disinformation, we need to stop, take a breath, and think about what we're sharing before we share it. And this is just a little meme. I'm sure you're all familiar with memes. So basically, highly emotional and provocative information stands a much stronger chance of lingering in our minds and being incorporated into our long-term memory banks. So the first job of mis and disinformation is to catch our attention. And for that reason, novelty or something new that you haven't seen before that might catch your attention is key. So information disorder, it's not all about the facts, right? We have this message about COVID-19, that could maybe be cured with some sort of at-home remedies. At this point, we know this not to be true, right? But certain things will present themselves as fact-based when they are not based in fact. So feeling powerless and vulnerable also makes us more susceptible to misinformation. You might notice, with the pandemic, right? People are becoming sick, people are, dying. That really causes a reaction in us to feel like we want answers. And so we might accept answers that might be less than true, right? And there's also some actors out there who are purposely feeding us this information, knowing that we feel powerless and vulnerable, right? Some bad actors, as we like to call them. So I'll talk a little bit about the difference between misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is when people share disinformation, but they don't realize it's false or misleading. And it's also because they're trying to help. Like the post I just showed you a second ago, right? That could be shared by someone who really wants to help another person who is sick with COVID-19 get better, right? But the person who shared it might have ulterior motives, right? And why do people share misinformation? Out of fear, to protect people, or just in case, as it displays their identity. And disinformation is when people intentionally create false or misleading information to make money or have political influence or to maliciously cause trouble or harm. And this could be a variety of reasons, for money, for political gain, or to sow distrust in the government or health institutions. Now, fake news. When we first started, I just said this is a term that we like to avoid, and here's why. So the term fake news is way too restrictive, right? I know you all probably have seen memes or videos, posts, websites, or podcasts, right? They can be manipulated. They're not necessarily fake. It's a little bit of a gray area, right? They're too binary of terms. Most content's not fake or real. It exists in these different shades of gray, and we'll talk about that in a second. And fake news, the term kind of targets the media. This term was initially used to target the media. And it's been used a lot by politicians and those who are divisive to discredit journalists and the media. So let's try to avoid that term. Okay, now I'm gonna show you 7 types of mis and disinformation. And don't worry about this, I will give examples. So there's satire or parody, right? Doesn't have the intention to cause harm, but has the potential. There's false connections when headlines, visuals, or captions do not support the content. Misleading content, which is use of information to frame an issue or individual. There's completely false context when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. Imposter content, and that's when genuine sources are impersonated. Manipulated, when genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive. And fabricated. This is something that's 100% false and is definitely made to deceive and do harm. And we can see right now we have these ranked from low to high, and I will show you here. So satire, this is an excerpt from The Onion. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with The Onion. There's other satire things that are, the Babylon Bee is another example, but these websites are meant to be funny. But sometimes they get so close to the truth in an attempt to be funny that when they're taken out of context, people believe that they are real, right? You take a screen grab of these, they start to proliferate across the internet and people start to think they're real, right? This is a form of misinformation. Then we have false connection, trying to equate something to something else that doesn't add up. Does drinking alcohol prevent coronavirus? No, it does not, but this is a real article. There's also misleading content. So this is a screenshot of a tweet from the Obama Foundation on May 17th that makes it looks like the foundation knew about the George Floyd death and protests before they happened. However, you can change thumbnails on websites, right, with a back date. So while the date may have seemed predated, the image was simply changed, right? So now that's a misinformation that's been spread, as you can see here via Twitter. This is false context, right? This is a picture that was spread during the George Floyd protests, saying that this McDonald's was on fire. This was actually from some years ago at an unrelated event. But during the summer, when there were anti-police brutality protests happening across the US, this was spreading, right, as a part of the narrative, and this being used by different various bad actors. There's imposter content. This was a website, right, for President Joe Biden where you could create your own avatar. Someone created an avatar that said voter fraud, right, is in mail-in ballots. And we saw that a lot leading up to the election. That was one of the things that happened that led to, our January 6th insurrection, was that a false belief of a voter fraud narrative. And this predates that. This came months before, right? So this is imposter content, posing to be from President Joe Biden's election campaign, but really fabricated. Here's some manipulated content. Now, as you can see, this image purports to be from the Capitol Hill, right? An autonomous zone in Seattle. Someone to the right, juxtaposed here, is a person with a machine gun. That is obviously not a real picture, but this was actually used and posted by Fox News. So it might not look like the best Photoshop to you, but it was indeed used in real reporting. So we have to watch out for manipulated content. And fabricated content. So I have an example that is both one from the right wing and one from the left. So during Texas, the blackouts that happened in Texas, there was false tweets created saying that I'll believe in climate change when Texas freezes over, claiming to be from Ted Cruz. This is a fake tweet. There are various websites that you can go to, please don't, to create fake tweets and fake content. Bad actors do this a lot. This was end up retweeted by someone and shared a lot. And then to the right, same thing. George Buck, who was, I think, running for Congress, reposted this tweet by AOC saying that restrictions must stay in place, keep us closed, but also a fabricated tweet. So tactics, right? I've gone over some of them. Memes, using a kernel of truth is very important in spreading mis and disinformation. Amplification, which is when things get reposted, right? And all sorts of things that I can get to as we move on. So closed messaging apps, not sure how many of you use them, but they are very popular, and they've been very popular in the dissemination of mis and disinformation. So we have things like MeWe, we have things like WhatsApp, which is some of the most popular, in order to, as you can see to the right, spread vaccine misinformation. Keyword squatting, which is a term coined by Joan Donovan and Brian Friedman from Harvard. So keyword squatting might be like a little more complicated, but basically it's the strategic domination of keywords to misrepresent groups, individuals, and information, right? I have this Save the Children example that kind of was co-opted by a group that you may have heard of, QAnon. You may have also heard that the BTS, right, was sometimes, you know, different music groups would co-opt hashtags, and those would be funny. But this is a way to put unpopular mis or disinformation within the first things that would come up on platforms such as Twitter. There's also, unfortunately, hate speech and disinformation. This has been spreading like wildfire on various platforms. You know, most lately, immigration, mis and disinformation, which we'll get to, and we'll talk about that a bit when we get to our immigration section. So there's emerging platforms as well. So whenever there's information, there's a possibility for disinformation. Many of you may be on TikTok, right? There's also a new platform called Clubhouse. But as these platforms are brand new, moderation and finding and combating disinformation really varies, right? So we have this example of Black doctors who are having a really hard time on Clubhouse combating COVID myths because it's an audio app. People can talk a lot, have a lot of various conversations, and it's difficult to get the truth out there, right? So when you're on new platforms or any platform, just to make sure that that information is real and accurate. There's also local groups and online spaces, communities. There's message boards. This is a popular message board that does a lot of good. Right? It's fun to get on message boards. You can sell things, you can talk to people, you can talk about various interests, but also disinformation and misinformation will spread, right? If there's not accurate information here. So that's another thing to look out for. And memes. Memes and images carry information, right? These are the biggest purveyors of information because they're attractive, they can be funny in certain cases, and they really spread like wildfire. I'm sure that, you know, we've all sent memes to our friends or in social media groups from time to time, but these can be really strong purveyors of mis and disinformation as well, as fun as they can be. And this is what we like to call the trumpet of amplification. So there's some anonymous webs and some anonymous platforms, sometimes that will go into closed networks, like I brought up, like MeWe or different chats. There's conspiracy communities that they will then go into, social media, and then professional media, right? So when you hear something like a conspiracy theory, that often starts all the way back on the anonymous web when a lot of people were not talking about it, right? And then grows until it reaches that tipping point. And the role of platforms and everything. So, you know, basically the platforms have been trying to reform, but have they done enough? Things really haven't changed over the last 4 to 5 years. So let's think about the role of some of the executives and how maybe you would change it as an executive that you could play in like the role of information disorder. So I'm going to talk about a few themes, and we've been calling this for the past year about racialized disinformation. And I've been working, as Liz has told you, with Black and Latinx communities who have been combating mis and disinformation in their communities since the election. So I'd just like to preface, please no screenshotting or tweeting or TikToking or anything, because if we to do that, that then spreads that information taken out of context, right? And we don't want that at all. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. So some election disinformation I will get into, and I'll use just a couple specific examples. So you may have seen that Kamala Harris, leading up to her first presidential bid, not vice president, a lot of misinformation was spreading that she was not an American Black person. Okay, and these memes were spreading, calling her Kamala Dolezal, Kamala's not African American, talking about her parents' immigration status, a lot of very xenophobic and racist content online. Then, we started to see what looked like, we cannot say, coordinated bot activity, basically just a cluster of accounts saying, she is not Black, she's Indian, and she's Jamaican, and, she's not, right? Then, we have other researchers who work in the field who started to notice that this was maybe coordinated or artificial operation, trying to spread this message, which we often call birtherism 2.0, right? Might have seen with Obama when people said, President Obama was not born here. They began to do that with Kamala as well, right? It got so big that, and I talked to you about the trumpet of amplification, that articles started, to proliferate about it. Donald Trump Jr. actually tweeted about it, which got a lot of engagement. So something went from being in a really small space to a really big space. And this was before her presidency. So now as we move into the vice president, we're seeing other figures spreading mis and disinformation. That was in turn labeled as false information by Facebook, but only after weeks. And then also another popular talk show host kind of echoing that same, rhetoric. Yes, so more of that. This was a really interesting thing because people were, another thing that would happen was saying that, Kamala Harris had, during her time as a prosecutor, locked up various Black individuals, right? And this was a very, very popular meme saying that it's a mosaic of Kamala Harris, of all the people that she locked up in prison. Obviously, this is not true. We investigated this, and you can find that this image, when you close up, it's just a repeat of the same image over and over again. But this did a lot of damage, and it was shared by a lot of people, right? I mean, this is all false information. There's also, going back to mail-in ballots, various post office boxes being removed. These post office boxes were not removed. These were actually already an overhaul of things way before the election had actually started, but they were being shared as if mailboxes were being removed to prevent people from voting. Same thing here. They were saying that mailboxes were locked. Actually, yes, on this side it is locked, but that was to prevent mail theft. On the other side, the mailbox was open and the collections were happening all the time. And various kind of confusing ways to vote by mail, right? It was saying, hey, vote by mail this way, but voting by mail varies from state to state. So this is what we like to call misinformation, because these people were trying to help other people vote, but inadvertently they were giving them the wrong information. And this was very hard because for, Black and Latino voters, our ballots were becoming rejected more often than other voters, right? So these types of discouraging things that were happening were not good as far as voting by mail, right? So this misinformation actually hurt. So now I'm going to get into a little bit of COVID-19 disinformation within the Black community. Mostly. This started a long time ago. As soon as COVID started to spread, there started to be conspiracy theories about if it was spread by the government, if it was intentionally spread to hurt the Black community. Immediately after, there were different gatherings and saying that we're not going to be researched on and we're not going to be given vaccines in trials, because people really started to believe from some of the messaging that was going on online that people were intentionally trying to test on the Black community. Some of you might not be familiar, but there is something called the Tuskegee experiments, right? And that is a historical legacy, as we call it, where Black people were not given anything, like given a bad vaccine, but they were not treated, right, for syphilis. And it was a great pain for the Black, American culture. And it's a great pain as a historical legacy. But online, some people who like to spread mis and disinformation use Tuskegee experiments to say in 2021, 2020, as this meme says, you shouldn't get a vaccine shot, saying not another Tuskegee experiment as a way to dissuade people from getting a vaccine shot, right? So like we like to say, there is a kernel of misinformation in a kernel of truth in all misinformation, right? This did happen, but as we know, vaccines, they're not testing. I mean, a lot of people have taken the vaccine, they've been tested, and they are effective. So we want to watch out for these types of things. Also, sometimes using these bad actors, celebrities, to prove their point, right? Hank Aaron, baseball legend, actually died after, right after receiving the COVID vaccine. He died of natural causes. However, this was spun to spread vaccine disinformation. Jesse Jackson also took the vaccine. However, he became hospitalized, but for a completely different issue. And then, Tyler Perry, who is a famous director, also took it, and they would say he was maybe paid to take the shot. None of these things are true, but bad actors who spread vaccine disinformation like to attach celebrity because that gets them, like we said, amplification and more of a platform. And then this is different, sometimes political leaders, right? There'll be videos about taking a vaccine, right? But they will also get weaponized because, some bad actors might say they're trying to use you as a guinea pig. They are trying to make you take this vaccine, right? Don't take it. Don't listen to, your government leaders and officials. So attaching a negative vaccine sentiment to political leaders is also a thing. And this is really troublesome because, even though we had things like Tuskegee experiment and different historical legacies, Black people seem to, from the numbers and the data, want to take the vaccine, right? There's long lines, and also there's a lack of access. As you see to the left, a Black neighborhood in Alabama has yet to get a single vaccine. And so there's also immigration disinformation. So I'm going to show you two pictures, right? Here's one picture of someone seemingly getting arrested in a line. So there's something a little bit off about this picture. I'm not sure maybe what it is, but these people are not being arrested for voter fraud. They were saying that immigrants were showing up and being arrested for voter fraud. So now you can see, like I showed you earlier, fabricated content. These were two different pictures. You might be able to tell that these were two different pictures because if I go back, no one in the line seems to even be staring at this, right? If someone was becoming arrested, wouldn't you be looking and taking pictures? People's phones would be out. So this is an example of actual fabricated content, which, as you can see to the right, was picked up by the media. Another thing that has just happened recently, using immigration to fuel, anti-immigration narratives, right? There's been a lot of talk about kids in cages, right? And what administrations have done what about that. But they're using pictures from 2-3 years ago. As you can see, this is from 2019. We have another picture that is from 2018 to fuel modern kind of alt-right narratives about information and claim that there's a crisis at the border. This is something that happened before yesterday, saying that these are Joe Biden's storage containers for immigrants, a horrible image. Actually, this man, Mr. Weber, is running for governor of California, right? This containment unit is for a COVID-19 containment unit in China. So they were building this, and it has nothing to do with America. It's not an American image. It's not of any sort of immigration related content, right? So let's talk about false and fabricated content. You can see how that's actually played out in the real world. So now I'm going to get into a little bit of verification with you, right, as we end our session. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures. This is of a wall that's been vandalized, and it says, disgusting. BLM protesters decided to vandalize a veterans memorial. We have another picture saying that, at a prayer rally in Forest Hill Park in St. Louis, Missouri, that these people attacked this man. We have another image saying that BLM protesters said they wanted to shut the business down, and another of BLM protesters storming Rochester after a police shooting, right? Saying, when will the madness stop? Now, all of these pictures are, again, false. They happened, right? But not at the time, they said. The first one is from another vandalization of another memorial that had nothing to do with BLM. The second image, if you look at other pictures from the event, you could see that the man in the green shirt was antagonizing these men. So this was not an there was another angle that we were not able to see. We're only able to see this image, but with a quick image search for an article, you can see how the whole situation played out. And the same with some of these BLM posts. In Rochester, actually, they were invited on the porch of someone who was protesting. They were in support of these anti-police brutality protests. So it's important to be mindful of how imagery works in mis and disinformation. So I'm just going to give you this completely hypothetical situation. At First Draft, we like to do simulations, which is where we kind of give, a scenario of some mis and disinformation and say, how would we best respond to this if this were really happening to us, right? So this is completely fabricated, right? But it's about an investigation into a person who was beaten by police officers, and it was caught on camera. An unfortunate situation that we know all too well currently. But in this faux article, we have a picture of some things burning and the victim being attacked, right? And saying that, things about the victim as well. So I'm going to ask at this point, from what I've gone over with you, how could we then determine that this information might be false? And these are tools that I think that you could use to, if you had any questions about something. So here, first we have the tweet, right? Then we can download the picture. It doesn't just have to be Twitter. This could be on various platforms, whichever ones that you use. There's a platform we like to use called Revi. There's other reverse image. There's Google reverse image search. There's a few different platforms, but you put that image into the platform and it's actually an attachment, Revi is, so you can just right click and reverse image search. And then you could see, hey, this picture is from Hamburg, Germany. It is not from the US, right? It's not from this place it claims to be. This is an easy way to search something. If someone shows you a picture online, you can say, hey, let me do a little reverse image search and find out the truth, right? And here we find this article, a G20 Hamburg riot, suspects raided by police across Germany. So here's another thing. There is some sort of rap sheet, right? That includes this person, this fictional person who may or may have not done. So it's been picked up by a different media outlet. Okay, we can do an advanced search, or we can do a search bar search and put in what is at the top of this rap sheet where it says 27 to 30 guilty. Okay. And when you do that, within the search bar, we have a winner. Okay. And then we also have other platforms we can use, such as Wayback Machine and Archive today, where you could end up finding where this actually came from. So this rap sheet did not actually come, right, was associated with this person. We can find who it might have been associated with if we want to. And then there's also, camera footage, right? We only get one angle, like I showed you with the picture that was taken at the BLM protest and a lot of these, different situations. How do we determine if it's real or not? Okay. So there's these things, and this might be a little bit more advanced, but that's okay. I just really wanted to show you. There's things called Boolean searches where we can search for a variety of things online without actually just searching for one thing, right? They're Boolean operators. So a good way to find other views of footage from other angles is to search I or me or my or her, his, right? The reason is I can say my footage or I saw or she or he, right? And then we can find other examples in the situation, right? So we would search that operator with Kai Torres or Kai and police or a police officer. And then voila, which happened really here. These are all real examples, by the way. We were able to see another example. And this is the example also in Twitter. Also InVid, which we can also use for video contextual verification. And that's it, everyone. I'm open to questions. We also, a lot of these tools, this might have seemed a little advanced at the end, but there's some really simple tools you can use. I can drop them, within the chat, but please let me know any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for that. We have some questions, and students, teachers out there, if you have more, feel free to submit those in the Q&A link that's in the description box. So one of the questions that came in, you talked about how some people sharing misinformation are trying to help. So what if you're that person and you inadvertently share something? What should you do then?
Very good question. If you're someone and you inadvertently share something that was wrong, we've all done it before, right? Because of that kind of like emotional skepticism that makes us feel angry or want to share. I would say if it was on social media, you could delete and you could say with a disclaimer, right? Oh, hey, that video that I shared, a couple minutes ago about so-and-so, that was not true. I actually found out the truth, maybe with a link to the actual, kind of fact-checked incident, right? And there's nothing wrong with, it's kind of hard, like say if you were to be confronted online by someone who was angry at you for sharing it, which is why I think it's good if you see misinformation online, you should talk to someone in their DMs, or if you can call them or text them, because sometimes people get embarrassed, right? And then they don't want to back down, and that they want to double down on what they've shared. So I would say if it's you, just don't take it personal. It happens to all of us. You can delete, and you can make an edit to a post and just say, hey, this isn't the accurate information.
Great, thanks. Another question, is there any accountability for falsifying information?
As far as platform accountability or tech accountability, right now, that's something that we're working on, right? Especially with Black and Latinx information. Like, the platforms have taken different steps to label false information. Some of the stuff that I showed you was labeled as the CDC, or labeled false, or as misleading. So I think that's an attempt to be accountable. However, we need more accountability in this information disorder kind of world, because a lot of the things are remaining up. They're remaining posted, especially a lot of the vaccine information, right? So tech accountability is a big issue that many activists, tech activists, are pursuing.
And another question kind of similar to that, you showed that like trumpet of amplification. How do we stop things from sort of making it up that way? Like, can we do things as individuals? Does it have to be the platforms?
That's really hard, right? Because you look at something like QAnon, and we know as researchers, because this is our job. Please do not, be looking on anonymous places in the deep dark web, right? That's our job. But once it reaches that tipping point, it's really hard to find it before then, and you don't want to, right? We hope that a lot of things get tempered out. Like, oh, we saw this has the potential of becoming another conspiracy theory, but it doesn't, for a variety of reasons. And we hope that the platforms are the ones to do that, right? Are they making steps? Yes, maybe not quick enough. So I would say it's definitely not up to someone, like personally to work on that information. But if you see something and it just doesn't sound right, it's just best not to share.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have an opinion on I think you shared 7 types of misinformation and disinformation. Do you see some of them as more harmful than others?
Well, I think manipulated content is something that is really harmful, right? If it's so good, even though some of it's not good, like I showed you, some of those mediocre examples were reshared by various media platforms. I think that can be really dangerous, because if someone thinks something's real and they see visual verification of that, that's very dangerous. I also think memes are, because of the fun nature of memes and like the lighthearted or supposedly lighthearted nature, we're more likely to share them and not think twice about it. But they can contain very, very harmful rhetoric. I also think satire can be a problem, because if a lot of the satire really borders along the line of as we unfortunately saw with what happened, yesterday in Atlanta, articles like The Onion often writes, this happens all the time in countries like this, or some sort of kind of sarcastic quip, right? But it seems very real. and very possible and plausible, right? So I think those to me would be the most dangerous types.
Okay. Are there organizations fighting misinformation?
Yes, there are. So First Draft is one of them. Like I said, we are a nonprofit that combats information and disinformation online. I in particular work in the Black and Latinx mis and disinformation. There is also, and we work with a group, a collective called the Disinfo Defense League. And the Disinfo Defense League is based of over 200 grassroots organizations fighting mis and disinformation, right? And CBOs and not other nonprofits who really come together and fight those things. There's also in newsrooms, there are also disinformation reporters and disinformation experts. So there are a lot of people, fighting this fight.
Great, that's good news. We have someone who asked, how can I help someone who has fallen hard for disinformation come to the realization that that has happened?
That is extremely difficult, and it really depends on what mis and disinformation has kind of their hooks in them. There was a recent article, and it was very sad, about someone whose own mother, had fallen down a rabbit hole of QAnon mis and disinformation, and how hard it was to get them out, right? I think that it's available on BuzzFeed. But yes, like this is someone's own mother, you're the most trusted person in your life, and you can't get them to believe this real types of information. So this is a really big struggle. And I think that we need to treat each other with compassion, right? If someone's sharing, please do not embarrass anybody on social media. Nobody wants to feel belittled or feel dumb. You know what I mean? That's really going to make them resentful of the information, and I think draw back into their, circle of conspiracy.
Yeah. We have a few questions that are around, are there sources that you can go to and kind of feel like you don't have to be so skeptical and just like you can go there and you can basically trust what you're seeing, like government sources or something like that?
I would say there's some really good reporting, on mis and disinformation at BuzzFeed. Jane at BuzzFeed, she does a lot of debunks. I'm not sure if any of you use Twitter, but just if something comes up, it is normally debunked. A lot of the things that happened yesterday, Davey Alba, New York Times, also debunks a lot of mis and disinformation, right? We also have Brandy at NBC. There's, there's journalists, reporters, and researchers all around, working that you can follow who debunk, just use trusted news sources and news sites. That's what I would really, advocate for. And of course, government, like when it comes to COVID-19 mis and disinformation, the CDC, the WHO, let's get all of our content from official sources.
Great. And a follow-up to that, how do we know that the sources like we're saying are trusted, or like fact-checking sites like Snopes? Why do we trust them? How do we know that we can trust them?
That's the ultimate question. I mean, fact checkers are, there to, get the truth, right? So, I mean, this is an argument of sometimes people on that other side. Like, how do I know you're telling the truth? Because I don't generally trust the media. That's something that's been implanted over the past 4 to 5 years. The media can't be trusted, fake news media. If you start to believe one thing, then you don't fall for anything, right? And that's really a difficult place where we're all at, right? So I think that it's just really important to see consistency in your fact checkers, consistency in the work, in order to really make a judgment call on who you would like to follow and trust. But I think that, for the most part, we have excellent journalists and media doing the work and reporting us with accurate factual information.
Great, thank you. We are almost out of time. So I am going to take this time now to kind of do our sign off. So thank you so much to Jacqueline for speaking with us. And thank you to everyone who is tuning in. And we hope you enjoyed this session. We hope that you were able to tune in for some of the sessions we had earlier. If you weren't, we'll be sending out the recordings after the event. And we also have a toolkit with lessons and activities that you can use in the classroom to continue this learning. Thanks, everyone.